working around the pulling up the ladder effect of what Facebook and Twitter effectively told Congress this week. I want to talk to you guys about what the hell is going on in the Suez Canal and what does this mean? I mean, Friedberg, what the fuck is this? This is unbelievable.
It's so random and unfortunate, but this ship that weighs 200,000 metric tons, that's taller, it's longer than the Empire State Building is tall, going through the Suez Canal, which I think, there's about 100 ships a day go through the Suez Canal. And it's, the Suez Canal really is, kind of an amazing engineering accomplishment that connect the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. It basically allows ships from Asia to not have to go all the way around Africa to get to Europe. And the ship goes into the Suez Canal and it had a blackout. Its power went out. And so it just kept cruising without being able to control the steering because there's like friggin' power steering on these massive ships. They don't have like a wire connected to the rudder. And so,
no backup battery supply, I guess.
Who knows? No one knows. But the power went out and the total blackout on the ship, they couldn't get the power back on and the thing just keeps cruising and cruising and cruising. And it cruises right into the side, which is this big sand barrier on either side of the Suez Canal. And it gets lodged in the sand barrier on the side. Now, when you have 200,000 metric tons moving at a few miles an hour, that's an incredible amount of momentum, of energy. And so when it lodges in the side, that's, it's lodged in there.
Mass
and now it's
times
stuck.
Acceleration equals
it's actually mass times velocity, but you're close. And so the thing just basically got lodged in there and they can't get it out. And now they think it's going to take another week or two before they'll be able to kind of dig all around the sand and tugboat the thing out of there. But I think what's interesting, so 10% of global trade moves through the Suez Canal, and about 100 of these massive ships a day, move through this canal. But it really highlights the fragility of our global supply chain. Similar to kind of the experience I think we had during the COVID pandemic when all of a sudden things like toilet paper were less available to us. But a small power outage on a boat, on a ship, in the middle of the Suez Canal can suddenly block up so much of global trade and cause, massive fluctuations in commodity prices and availability of supplies and products for businesses around the world. There's going to be rippling economic effects for a period of time. It's unclear how significant they're going to be. But, I really do think that taking note of the fragility of our supply chain in this particular context is worth taking a step back. And, I spend a lot of my work time, obviously off the podcast, thinking about kind of our systems of industry. And, the global industrial revolutions were really predicated on this notion of centralization. We took a lot of our production systems and we centralized them and created automated repeatable tasks. And that reduced the cost and allowed us per unit of production to basically make things much more affordably. But the problem with centralization, generally speaking, in supply chains is exactly this, which is you have a supply chain that is much more delicate. And it is much more, think about the difference in power, right? If the power goes out at a power plant, all the homes that are connected to it lose power, versus if every home had their own power generator or solar cells, they could continue to support themselves. And in a similar context, so much, and this goes back to our conversation earlier about globalization, so much of our global supply chain for industry has become centralized by finding the lowest cost possible, but it loses all of its durability. And so the 21st century, and especially leading into this infrastructure bill that we're going to be talking about, or that's going to be talked about for a long time now, for months to come, presents an opportunity for us to think about durability in industry and durability in supply chains that I think is really profound and allows us to shift the balance of power, but also shift the sources of production of all the things we consume as a species in a much more distributed way. And that can be done using green technology, using 3D printing, printers, using biomanufacturing, using solar. There's a lot of
vertical farming.
Whatever. I'll disagree with you on that one, and we'll talk about that separately. But I would argue like so much of industry has been centralized because, remember, when the Industrial Revolutions took hold, the only skill set we had as a species was mechanical engineering. And in the years that followed, we developed skills in chemical engineering and ultimately in software and hardware engineering, and now more recently in biochemical engineering, where we can use biological systems to make stuff. And the advent of those technology capabilities, I think, really gives us the opportunity today to reinvent these supply chains. And so the Suez Canal, I hope, is a little bit of a wake-up call, and I hope leads into some of the thinking around the infrastructure build proposals where we're about building durability in the supply chain. And in that process, by the way, creating manufacturing jobs, in a more distributed way.
Let me build on what you're saying. So for all of the people listening that really, really care about electrification and electric cars, and there's a bunch of Tesla bulls here. Tesla uses a specific kind of battery called NCA. And there's, other forms of batteries, but for the most part, and Tesla in China uses this LFP chemistry. But the point is, there's a lot of very, very valuable nickel that goes into making lithium-ion batteries. And so if you believe in electrification and you believe in, zero emissions and you believe in using these batteries, you need to believe in nickel, which is a tough business. Okay. You're grabbing, rock out of the ground and you're leaching this extremely important, metal out of it. So just a little while ago, there is a huge nickel manufacturer, called, Norilsk Nickel, right? And they have these 2 Russian nickel mines. And just very recently, they flooded. And the plug, which had been erected for localizing the flooding, was washed away, not for the first time, not for the second time, but for the third time. And people now think that getting all this water out of the mine may take at least a year. Okay? So why should we care? Well, right now, if you think about all the batteries that we're forecasted to make in order to sort of eliminate climate change and, do all these good things, and for, Tesla to make their, beautiful cars, or whomever they need nickel. And right now we have a deficit of nickel that's going to emerge now in less than a year. And we have about a 37 to 40% shortage of what we need. So it's like you have all these grandiose visions of how the world should work, and an electric failure in a barge shuts down the global supply chain for weeks.
A flood in the nickel mine.
A flood in a nickel mine is going to cause the price of a Tesla to basically double. And shouldn't people at some point ask ourselves, is this really what efficiency is supposed to feel like on the ground? And it may not be. Right. And so maybe, again, going back to the first conversation, a little bit more inefficiency, a little bit more inflation, a little bit more redundancy will allow us to be resilient. And maybe that's what we really want. We don't want.
Well, you could ask the people in Texas what they want after they lost their power and they have one light snowstorm and the whole city's destroyed. There really is. There is something to having the redundancy in your home and the supply chain, and obviously drugs, which we witnessed during the pandemic. And I guess that's an opportunity with the infrastructure bill.
We were so concerned about short-term profit maximization that we offshored our entire pharmaceutical production and PPE manufacturing to China, which then said that they might ration it to us based on, geopolitical concerns.
No, thank you.
So yeah, that is penny wise and pound foolish. The absolute definition.
Is the infrastructure bill going to fix it, Friedberg? You have a rundown of the infrastructure bill?
There isn't good clarity on this. My concern is that there's going to be lots of push for things like roads and stuff that doesn't create ongoing jobs. That so much money is going to go into basically a disguised stimulus package, versus the ideal kind of infrastructure program set. Is to enable industry. So if you go back and you think about like the Manhattan Project and the Apollo mission, those were very expensive government programs that have a very specific mandate. But because there were big investments and difficult problems, they unlocked a lot of industry that followed that initial development cycle. And I think that is kind of a good guideline for us to think about with respect to what we might hope for an infrastructure bill to do, which is to create unlock for industry, as opposed to plowing money into short-term service contracts with a bunch of guys who are going to make a ton of money building roads, and it doesn't really change the industry very much. And so I'm concerned it's going to be a giveaway of money that's going to create a short-term stimulus, but doesn't really create long-term effects in the industry. But we'll see what kind of comes out as they get more clarity on this. There's certainly a big push for quote-unquote green, but I'm not sure the people that are quote-unquote green advisors in this context are going to be thinking about this, this next century of opportunity. So we'll see.
America's going to have a real come to Jesus if they actually really give a shit about climate change. I'll give you a different example. Like, again, to really electrify, you have to pull metals out of the ground. That is a dirty business. Okay. And there are impacts to the environment, even if you're the best at it. And right now in the Western Hemisphere, it takes 20 years to greenlight a mine. 20 years. Our shortages start in the next year. In China, they have, no issues whatsoever, right? Let's just say. So maybe it takes them 7 to 10 years to get a project greenlit. Now, I'm not advocating that we become China, but I think that it's really important for us to realize that, if we're going to really take this seriously, you can't have progress being hijacked by things that may not matter as much in the grand scheme of things. Like there is the opportunity, for example, to build a massive set of copper and nickel mines in the Western Hemisphere. But the minute that they get greenlit, there's an injunction that's filed by an NGO that'll say, we have to think about the land grouse. And it's like, well, what the fuck is the land grouse? And at some point, you have to figure out whether you actually want your kids to have asthma or not, and whether they can suck up, PM 2.5 and PM 10 for the rest of their lives, or you care more about the land grouse. And this is going to come to a head, and hopefully the infrastructure bill paves the way for these decisions, because I think as a country, we're going to have to decide, because many other countries, in order to have clean air and drinkable water, are going to basically prioritize humans over the land grouse.
Yeah, it reminds me of the nuclear discussion we had earlier in this podcast of we can't even put a new nuclear power